Hey everyone, this is Christian Heimel, host of Press Row. Thanks so much for listening to the following broadcast, courtesy of Public House Media.
This is John Lauder, host of The Cheap Seats here on Public House Media. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media. Once you're done with this episode, I hope you'll come check out my show, The Cheap Seats, where we talk about sports from the fans' perspective. A new show comes out every Monday. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes so you never miss an episode of The Cheap Seats. Thanks again for checking out the following broadcast on Public House Media.
And welcome to Your Soccer Passport here on Public House Media. My name is Brice Burge.
And I'm Ivan Sanchez Carrasco. Brice, it's cold outside, but this show's heating up. We're running through a lot of stuff today. We got a Women's World Cup draw, Liga MX finals, Champions League draw, and a slew of MLS topics to talk about today.
Your Soccer Passport is sponsored by Squadcast, as podcasters that deal with analysts and guests from around the world. Being able to record remotely is key. Current industry standards rely heavily on internet connection, but Squadcast changes that with a simple browser-based tool that requires no additional software to install. The audio is recorded locally as high-quality WAV files, then uploaded to the host computer, allowing really good audio quality. To get started with your remote podcasting recording experience, go to squadcast.fm for your 14-day free trial. Let's jump right on in. Let's start with the single event thing. That would be the Liga MX finals. Club America taking it home over Cruz Azul by an aggregate of 2-0 after a scoreless first leg. America just completely dominated the second leg of that. What were your thoughts?
I was actually pretty disappointed in the finals. Both legs, I thought both teams, especially the first leg, kind of and part in the second leg too, kind of played to not make a mistake, kind of played not to lose. Cruz Azul played really timid. I don't want to say they played afraid, because I think that's almost insulting to say, but they played not to make a mistake, and that kind of cost them, especially in the second. And that's kind of where America got their first goal. Corona, the goalkeeper, kind of plays it out nonchalantly to a defender, kind of takes it away, and then the young Mexican 20-year-old Edson Alvarez hits a left-footed shot in the back post. Really beautiful goal. And then after Cruz Azul has kind of played defensively or not, they weren't going out and attacking for a game and a half. All of a sudden, they're now forced to have to completely change their tactics and their style on the fly to try to get that goal and try to push into extra time. And they just didn't have it. So I think if you're a Cruz Azul fan, you're really disappointed in the way these two games kind of panned out. And if you're Club America, you are now the most winningest team in Mexico, getting the 13th championship, getting one more than your arch rival, Chivas de Guadalajara, and you are riding a high right now. So, I mean, that's kind of my brief takeaway from the two legs over the last couple of days.
I think you nailed it. I mean, Azul really was just, not being so directly involved with Mexican soccer. This is the kind of stuff that I think a lot of people from the United States and Canada see typically from the Mexican national team in a lot of ways, that they don't like to go out and, they would rather prefer to have the possession than they would to have the shots. And I think that showed up this time. 56% percentage in advantage for Azul, 0 shots on target through the entire game. So, I mean, that in itself is a big factor. I know there was a red card late in the game that didn't really have an impact in it, besides helping out with the insurance goal. But, this was a game and a final, really, where both teams really avoided wanting to upset the apple cart, and there was no risk it moments, really, for either side. I think, Alvarez's first goal, while beautiful, I think you set it up well. It was advantageous. It wasn't necessarily something that was a product of good coaching, good skill, or anything else. It was taking advantage of a person's mistake, and those finals never are as fun as you hope that they would be, especially for a matchup that was going to set up itself so well. I mean, I was really looking forward to this matchup, and I thought both legs were obscenely boring. So
yeah, and it's crazy because a lot of the flack that Liga MX gets is that it's very attacking and the defense isn't as strong as other leagues. And then it's very, they throw caution to they don't, they just go out and attack usually throughout the whole league. And that's kind of, that's the beauty of it. And then that's kind of the thing that kind of gets criticized a lot from others who don't watch Liga MX week in, week out, is how bad or how offensive minded it is. And then all of a sudden this final was just so almost, cagey could be a word if I want to be positive, if I want to be negative, boring, I think would be the words for it. And then, so it's disappointing, especially I who follow it so much, that both teams played so defensive minded and timid. So, and for a casual fan, it is disappointing if this is your first time or you watch Liga MX only for these moments, that this is the final that you got. I mean, you had 80,000 people at both games because the Estadio Azteca is huge, and these fans were wanting more too. And I think it was disappointing, I guess, if you're a casual fan. If you're Club America, you had a fantastic 10 days. Last week you beat Pumas, your city rival, in the semifinals. In the finals, you beat your other city rival, Cruz Azul, and then you have your arch rival, Chivas de Guadalajara, who a day before goes and craps the bed over at Emirates at the Club World Cup. So you were just riding high if you're a Club America fan right now.
Yeah, it was not a good time for the rest of us, though. And so, I'm glad Club America is having some good times, because they didn't really give us anything worthwhile watching on the pitch through that game. And they did take an advantage in the second leg. In both the finals and semifinals, but ultimately, for somebody that this was the first season that I dedicated to paying attention to Liga MX and watched a lot of the English language broadcasts on because everybody makes fun of me for my poor Spanish skills. But I watched the English language broadcasts on Facebook Live, and so I have no problems with that. But this was the worst. Both of the games were probably the worst two games I've actually sat down and watched all year, and I would have turned it off if it wasn't for the final. And that's what's frustrating about it. So let's leave that, because I think we're just going to keep on repeating at this point. Let's move over to the Women's World Cup draw. We said that we would focus on this week. It's still way out in advance, but we do have some initial things that we can talk about, a rapid reaction type segment. Group A has the host team France, Norway, South Korea, and Nigeria. Looks to be a pretty solid group. Group B, Germany, Spain, China, and South Africa. Group C is Italy, Brazil, Australia, Jamaica. Group D is England, Scotland, Argentina, and Japan. Group E is Netherlands, Canada, New Zealand, and Cameroon. Group F, Sweden, United States, Chile, Thailand. In this matchup, there will be a number of teams that finish in third place that will move on to the knockout round as well, just because there are 24 teams that make the Women's World Cup and 16 will move along. So the group stage is not necessarily as big of a deal as it is in the Men's World Cup. Based on that initial pairing and setup, what kind of storylines do you see starting to materialize as we start to head towards coverage of the Women's World Cup?
Yeah, I kind of took down some notes. I thought Group A is kind of the group of death. The group of death, if you're going to have a group, Norway, who has the reigning Ballon d'Oro player on it. You have Nigeria, who's probably the strongest African team year in, year out in women's soccer. So I think that's and then you have South Korea, who's going to be very disciplined. So I think that's kind of the toughest group. I think Group B is pretty interesting as well with Germany. We've mentioned on the show how Spain has really grown their women's game with their youth teams, and now you're going to see it at the senior level. China is going to be tough as well. And then I thought Group C, Group D, and Group F kind of have the two main teams, and then you have other teams battling for that third spot. I think Group C, you have Australia and Brazil ahead of the pack. You have In Group D, England and Japan ahead of the pack, and then in Group F, you have USA and Sweden ahead of everybody else. And then I think Group E is kind of the weakest one, the one where it's kind of up. If you're Canada, you're really happy with this group, and I think if Canada doesn't win that group, it's pretty disappointing. Those are kind of my initial reactions with each group.
I don't know. I would disagree a little bit with that. I don't think you're giving Netherlands enough credit, seeing that they're ranked number 7 in the world. I mean, they stumbled a couple of times by getting in their own head, like in that process. But that does open the door for a New Zealand team that got pushed a little bit more than they wanted to in the group stage of their regional qualifying, just to go out and demolish everybody once it got to knockout stages. So, I mean, it creates an interesting thing. I think the storylines out of Group E are going to be the most compelling, just because you've got the 5th and the 7th ranked teams in the world in that group, and New Zealand still in the top 20, where New Zealand could potentially play a problem child there. I mean, when you're looking at getting 3 teams out, I think Group E is probably one of the better ones for getting 3 teams out, because I think New Zealand is often disregarded as Australia's little sister, even though that they've been doing a good job in international tournaments, and their progress has been a little bit slower than Australia's, but they've been making consistent progress the entire time. So when you have New Zealand there, and you have Canada that's kind of been like on that borderline of, are we an elite program or are we not an elite program, going up against the Netherlands group that is still looking to make a splash, where they kind of will be looking at getting out of that group regardless. It is an interesting setup. I mean, Netherlands is there because they're probably the 3rd best team in Europe right now. Let me pull up the actual rankings. They are the 4th best team behind Germany, France, and England in the European grouping, ahead of Norway, ahead of Sweden. So Netherlands, they've got some skills in front of them, and that's because they did just improve 3 spots in the international ranking. So I think you're sleeping a little bit there, because I think Canada's going to have some problems with that group if they don't come in there and believe that they have faith in themselves. It's going to create a very interesting storyline for the Canadians through this year.
I don't want to sleep on Netherlands, but we've talked about this when USA played Canada in the World Cup qualifying, how we're not sure if Canada believes in itself against the upper echelons of the USAs, the Englands, the Japans, and they don't have one of those teams in their group. So that's why I'm saying more this is a good group for Canada, because they're not being challenged in the way we questioned are they up to that next level, and they're not going to have to answer that right away in the group stage. So I think that's kind of where my mentality is coming from, because we've talked about on this show how we're not sure if Canada feels that they are at that next level, and we saw it against the USA in the World Cup qualifying, and they're not up against a Sweden, they're not up against an England teams or Germany or France. So I think they're not. The questions we had for them, they're not going to be answered right away in the group stage.
Group F, just talking briefly on the United States here before time runs out on this opening segment here on Your Soccer Passport. Do you believe that Chile or Thailand can do anything in this group, or is this going to be just U.S. and Sweden coasting through?
I think they're going to coast through. I think Thailand is going to. We talk about in women's soccer the have and have-nots, and unfortunately Thailand, I think, is one of the have-nots. And I can see them getting 8 goals, 10 goals scored on them. We see it every once in a while, especially at the Women's World Cup. And I think that's going to be kind of I think that's going to be what's going to happen. Sweden and USA are going to take advantage of a very easy group beside the matchup between themselves.
All right, that will do it for this opening segment on Your Soccer Passport Women's World Cup draw, as well as Liga MX finals. We're going to take a quick break, and when we return, lots of MLS news to talk about. That's all here on Your Soccer Passport by Public House Media, sponsored by Squadcast.fm.
What's up, everybody? This is Christian Heimel, host of Press Row here on Public House Media. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media. Once you're done with this episode, I hope you'll come check out my show, Press Row, where we talk about the biggest issues in sports with the analysts, experts, and reporters who cover them. No nonsense, hard-hitting interviews on the sports topics you're talking about. A new show comes out every single Thursday. And don't forget to subscribe on iTunes so you never miss an episode of Press Row. Thanks again for checking out the following broadcast on Public House Media.
And welcome back to Your Soccer Passport. We are on social media and would like to hear from you. Don't be afraid to interact with us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. So, Yvonne, let's talk MLS. Lots of news coming from that way. I think the big one there to talk about right off the bat is FC Cincinnati. They had their expansion draft that impacts every single team in the league, and they were able to take 5 players from that draft. They flipped one right away, grabbed some others in trades, and that just a really unique situation there. So let's talk about the FC Cincinnati draft. To me, oh man, I got to be looking at that Camara trade to Colorado for the international roster after taking him from Vancouver as the biggest news there. But what was your kind of big moment from the expansion draft?
I mean, I thought so too. I think that was a big spot. Because they picked up Costa Rican international Kendall Watson for that trade, and so you kind of see where their mind's out a little bit with what they want to do with the roster, with kind of having a more solid defense. And they already had Fernando Adi from the Timbers on the roster, so I guess they didn't need another. They felt they had their main forward or their main their forward that they want to build around their attack. So they didn't. I guess they felt they didn't need Kamara in that sense, and so I think those are the takeaway. You're right. I think that was the biggest takeaway, how they flipped him for a really solid defender.
You know what you're starting to see now, and I think it was probably more pronounced in the Vegas Golden Knights expansion draft more than anything else in recent time, is that teams are now starting to aggressively get to the point where they will trade. Initially, like, don't take this unprotected guy, but this is what we want to do, so help us out and we'll help you out and we'll find something that works out. And you started seeing that with the Minnesota Wild and how they interacted with the Vegas Knights before that expansion draft happened, and they in return did not take a certain unprotected player. And you were kind of starting to see that with where players wanted to go, because you saw trades happening beforehand, and Kamara was not happy with where he's at. He's known to be almost like that Jimmy Butler type player, where he's never happy wherever he goes. And his personality is tough to deal with sometimes. So, as a person that is also usually never happy in life, I can understand how that goes down and how that impacts your coworkers. But at the exact same time, that level of coordination shows that Cincinnati is probably ready to play, and that they're getting some good moves right now. Their defense is solid. You talked about some of the moves that came around from that. You also had Greg Garza from Atlanta United popping up, and so even with their defensive focus, they're showing that their defense can expand to that neutral third just a little bit, with having some guys that can move around pretty well. I mean, I would think that they'd be able to put numbers up front real quickly, so that would change the type of offensive guy that you're looking for up top, and can really create some different possibilities for you. So they also picked up Darren Maddox too, as a forward as well, somebody that, again, can go up there real fast and then bring that orange wave with them behind them. So that's a very interesting aspect, too, to see him pop up, just because he's been kind of a feast or famine type player for DC United as well.
Yeah, and he was kind of like that with the Timbers as well. He has his moments when he's not an impact player who will change. He's the kind of guy you can bring off the bench. He can change the game for you, but he's not consistent. I think that's the biggest problem with him, that he's not consistent. But I was also interested that they picked up the 20-year-old from the Red Bulls, Hassan Nidam, and I think promising young guy. And I think if he has the opportunity to play week in and week out, you're going to see a real growth from him in that position too. So it's really interesting what they're doing and the approach they're going with. A little different than what you got from LAFC and Atlanta United the last couple of years. But they, compared to those teams, they already have kind of a base built around them because they're already a club that exists. So it's interesting to see how they've gone about this compared to these other teams in recent years.
And that's the thing. You almost have to compare them more closely with Minnesota United more than anybody else just because of the team that's already existing. I think that's one of the reasons why they went out and got the guy from Red Bulls too, is because they eliminated them from the playoffs in the USL. So like going out and grabbing the player that burnt you the most is definitely going to be kind of a motivational tool, especially for FC Cincinnati, which still has some front office staff, still have a couple of guys that are still around that franchise, maybe not on the pitch, but can tell everybody about that big, massive run that they had in the Open Cup a couple of years ago to be in the semifinals and to defeat players and teams and MLS clubs that kind of cast away these players into the USL. And so it is interesting in that format now to see where FC Cincinnati will move along to when you've already got a base and when you're already looking for star players and trying to figure out who's going to be that next guy. It's almost like playing Moneyball in a not a top league. It makes it a very unique situation. And I think we're going to learn more about FC Cincinnati those first 3 weeks of the season more than any other time. So it is an interesting lineup for Cincinnati in the MLS. Let's go up north, but stay in Ohio. Caleb Porter, pretty much a done deal in being signed with the Columbus Crew, taking over for Berhalter. Porter is very well known in the Ohio region for all of the years that he spent with Akron and what the Zips had done in collegiate soccer. He's a guy that's known for the area. He's exactly the kind of hire that a group like Columbus needed after all of the Save the Crew efforts and pairing up with so many people to keep that franchise in Ohio instead of Austin. So it will be an interesting lineup now for the Crew as they figure out what they're going to do moving forward. Caleb Porter, though, was in Portland for the longest time. You got to see him coach in person. What do you think Porter's going to do now that he will eventually be in charge of this Crew team?
I mean, if his time in Portland says anything, he's going to bring in a lot of Akron guys. But it was interesting because they said he was in the running for the LA Galaxy job as well. But it seems the Crew is more his fit because he is kind of at times he was hard to deal with, I think, with the front office and with players in Portland. That was kind of the vibe we got being in Portland, that he was very difficult to deal with, very not dictatorish, but he had a lot to say, and I think that was kind of the falling out he had and why he left Portland as well, was the butting heads he had with the front office and the GM. So I think the Crew would fit that personality more compared to the LA Galaxy, where I think he would have trouble reaching the players that the Galaxy has compared to the Crew, where he can have a little more control over everything. So it's a good hire for them. Like you said, he's very comfortable in the Ohio region, won a lot with Akron, and I think for him it's more, a lot of it's that comfort too of having been there in that region and knowing the people, and I think it's going to work both ways.
With Porter coming back to the Crew, I think it is an interesting aspect, just because if he's pushing on that kind of stuff, then ultimately it shows that there's a dedication there to win. I mean, ultimately, for me, when I look at who are they going to go out and hire, they had to go out and get a guy that locals trusted in one way or the other, to not just up and leave after one or two good seasons, and two, have to get somebody that was going to say this is what it's going to be. Because if you have that ownership group with the Haslams and everybody kind of piecing together this franchise to keep it around, there are a lot of things off that presidential suite, off that administrative process, that it's going to cause drama anyway. You have to have a guy that's strong enough to say flat out, I'm the coach of this team, I'm the manager, this is how we're going to play our game, and we're going to win because of it. I think that's what Caleb Porter will bring, and you kind of talked about that a little bit more, and I couldn't agree more, just because I think that is going to be the case moving forward for Columbus, who have remained to be a successful program. It's just a matter of what's going to happen now as they move towards this post-Berhalter stage. Let's talk MLS a little bit more with transfer windows. It sounds like Stefan is probably going to be moving on over towards the EPL. There's also some conflicting reports that Miguel Almiron from Atlanta United may be heading towards Arsenal, but those have been extremely conflicted. People across the aisle and across the pond saying two very different things. It's actually been the most conflicted report that I've seen in a very long time.
Yeah, I think the latest is that Miguel looks like he's probably going to join Newcastle, looks like, compared to Arsenal. So a little lower. I think Stefan is almost like a set deal that he's going to join City. I think for United, it's really for Atlanta United, it's interesting. They're going to have to not start new, but coming off the MLS Championship, all of a sudden you're losing your coach, you're losing one of your two best players. I mean, Martinez might leave as well. His stock's not going to be higher than it is right now. So for Atlanta United, it'll be interesting to see if they can rebuild or reload instead of having to rebuild, losing players and coaches and stuff of that matter. I think Stefan to City it's a good move for him. I mean, he's obviously not gonna. He's there to back up. He's there to play a backup role because Bravo tore his ACL, the backup keeper for City. But I mean, anytime you get to play under Pep Guardiola, I think it's an opportunity to learn and to grow. So I mean, that's great for him. And yeah, it's good to see that the MLS isn't just a league where you can just show up and end your career. It's a nice launching pad to bigger and better things. So it's good for those players in that regard.
That will wrap up this segment on the MLS. Lots of big MLS news. We'll try to keep up with it here on future shows as well. This will be a good time to remind fans that we will not have a show next week because of the Christmas holiday. Public House Media as a whole staying away from putting out new shows on Christmas Eve, and the day after Christmas, the beginning of Kwanzaa. So if you are looking for a show next week, there won't be one. Here's your warning right now. We're going to take a quick break. Worldwide Headlines is up next. And then when we return, we will talk about the Champions League draw. Lots of intriguing games and matchups there. You're listening to Your Soccer Passport here on Public House Media, sponsored by Squadcast.fm.
This is Rachel Mullins, host of #NoFilterFriday here on Public House Media. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media. Once you're done with this episode, I hope you'll come check out my new show, #NoFilterFriday, where we talk about all of the sexual misconduct allegations swirling around Hollywood. A new show drops every Friday at 8:30 Pacific Standard Time. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes so you'll never miss an episode of #NoFilterFriday. Thanks again for checking out the following broadcast on Public House Media.
Time now for Worldwide Headlines here on Your Soccer Passport, a segment touching on some of the other big news from around the soccer world. The NCAA Soccer Championships have wrapped up. 11th-seeded Maryland took home the men's title with a 1-0 victory over Akron. Midfielder Amar Sejic had the winning goal in the 56th minute on a penalty kick. The tournament had a number of upsets, with unseeded teams like Michigan State, James Madison, Air Force, and Lipscomb making deep runs in the bracket. On the women's side, the bracket went chalk as all four number one seeds, Stanford, North Carolina, Florida State, and Georgetown, made the Final Four. Dallas DeRossi came off the bench to give the Seminoles the 1-0 victory for the title to Florida State over North Carolina. In Division 2, Barry University came from behind to win 2-1 against Westchester on the men's side. Bridgeport upset powerhouse Grand Valley State 1-0 on the women's side. Tufts and Williams win the D3 men's and women's titles, respectively. Dave Sarachan will be taking over USL side North Carolina FC. This is the first full-time regular job for the former U.S. interim manager since 2007 with the Chicago Fire. And Barcelona thrashed Levante 5-0 this weekend, but the importance is for the stats for Lionel Messi, not the actual victory. Messi scored his 43rd hat trick for a Spanish club, second all-time behind Ronaldo's 44. He also scored his 50th goal of the year, marking the 8th time he's done that for club and country in the last 9 seasons, and he is the first player in Europe's top 5 leagues this year to reach double-digit goals and assists. Worldwide Headlines is sponsored by the Public House Media's merchandise shop on TeePublic. The best way to support your favorite shows is with t-shirts, mugs, wall art, and more, all available in the TeePublic shop. Visit teepublic.com/pubhousemedia. That's teepublic.com. Welcome back to Your Soccer Passport here on Public House Media, sponsored by Squadcast.fm. I'm Brice Birch, Yvonne Sanchez Carrasco 2. Follow us on Twitter at Yvonne Sanchez C90 and at that Brice Birch, Brice with an I. Lots of additional commentary there, as well as our personal comments and thoughts on many things beyond the soccer world or in other aspects of the soccer world. The Champions League draw has been announced. The way that the draw works, for those that do not know, is that there are 2 pods. There is a pod of group winners and a pod of group runner-up. And then the only other fail-safe is that you cannot play against somebody from your own federation. So it created some interesting matchups. Schalke versus Man City, Madrid or Atletico Madrid versus Juventus, Man U versus Paris Saint-Germain, Tottenham Hotspur versus Borussia Dortmund, Lyonnais versus FC Barcelona, Roma versus Porto, Ajax versus Real Madrid, and Liverpool versus Bayern Munich. I made an attempt. It's German names too that I can't pronounce as well. So I've been under the weather for a long time, folks. So I'm just trying to roll with it this week. I appreciate your patience. But so Bayern Munich versus Liverpool. There we go. So with those lineups, Yvonne, you seem to rank these based on some kind of qualifications of what's going to be most exciting, what's going to be the easiest, what is your ranking, and how does your ranking go?
I guess I rank them by matchups, most intriguing matchups, the ones I think are going to captivate the audience the most. I'm actually really excited about this round of 16. I think this has more intriguing matchups than years past, especially with the runners up, kind of made it interesting. So starting off, the worst matchup, or I think the easiest one to call, is Manchester City over Shakhtar. I think that's great draw for Man City. I think they're going to roll over Shakhtar. Just, a good Bundesliga team, but kind of round of 16 is where they kind of stand. So I think City kind of wins that one easily. Looking ahead in February, the 7th rank coming in number 7, Leon and Barcelona. Kind of similar. Leon, a nice story coming out of the group stage with City, beat and gave them a couple of tough matches. But, Barcelona has Messi, and I think they're going to kind of roll through that matchup as well. The 6th matchup, best matchup, Roma versus Porto. I think this one's going to be pretty even, but you just don't have any of the heavyweights in Europe fighting each other in this matchup, so that's kind of why it's 6th. Coming in number 5, PSG, Paris Saint-Germain.
I want to jump in on that one. Roma versus Porto is actually one of the most compelling matchups, in my opinion.
I think so too. I think it's going to be even. Very good.
Just because when you have that evenness and you don't have anything else to lose to that kind of stuff, I see players do things that they would not usually try. So I'm excited. For people that are not used to the Champions League, that's probably the game to pay attention to more than I think some of the other ones.
Yeah, I think it's an underrated matchup, but it just doesn't have any of the heavyweights going at each other. So I think that's why I put it at 6th. United versus PSG, I put at 5th. By name, United's big, but United's been pretty terrible. We're not even sure if Mourinho's going to be coaching them by February, but I mean, it's a good matchup for PSG because they're gonna face a United team that's struggling right now. Number 4, Real Madrid versus Ajax. You have a young and exciting Ajax team. You have the 3-time defending champions. Real has kind of struggled a little bit this year, but I mean, until they're finally eliminated from Champions League, the king is still the king. So number 3, Spurs versus Dortmund. I think that's going to be fireworks. You have Dortmund, who's leading the Bundesliga right now. Spurs, who made it out of a tough group with Inter and Barcelona. I kind of give a little slight to Dortmund just because the way they're playing right now. Who knows how it's going to be in February? But Spurs have kind of shown a little more grit and being able to kind of find ways to keep battling. And when years past, they would fold. So I think that's a good matchup. And number 2, Liverpool versus Munich. You have, along with Juventus, Barcelona, and Real Madrid, Munich have kind of been the class of Europe. They're struggling this year, and you have a Liverpool team who's flying right now, and they made out a tough group with PSG. So I think that's a real captivating matchup. And last, the best matchup, I think, in this round, Atletico Madrid versus Juventus. You're going to have a defensive-minded Atletico team who's going to look to beat up and kind of drag this matchup against a Juventus team led by Ronaldo. And it's just a really unique aspect of styles. You're going to a very attacking-minded Juventus and a very defensive-minded Atletico Madrid. And I wouldn't be surprised if Atletico Madrid beats Juventus in this matchup. But I think it's the most intriguing when it comes to styles. So those are my 8 through 1 ranking of the matchups.
I think they're pretty good. I guess that kind of comes down to the aspects of how, what are you looking for in a matchup? As somebody that does, that does not follow a lot of soccer leagues for the fun aspect of it. I follow a lot of MLS. I follow a lot of international soccer, but when it comes down to club stuff like this, even though there are so many great teams, I guess it does change up my matchups because I don't personally think that, just because a team has a brand or prestige makes it a better matchup. I'm looking at some of these other ones Man U and PSG, if you're a dynasty hater, you hate that matchup and you hope the terrorists win. You just hope that nobody does anything good in that matchup, that you hope that it just burns to the ground and it looks like you replace all the good players with people that can't kick a football. Because it is just, nobody likes these teams. Really, it's trendy to like those teams, especially with the way that both franchises have, spend to win. So, that makes it least compelling in my matchup because you don't want to see a winner. But then it also,
I don't mind PSG actually.
Oh well,
I don't really mind.
We have some people that are not fans of PSG, especially in that group chat that we have for the show. It is amazing for what PSG has done, especially with all the allegations that have kind of fizzled out lately about them overcharging for sponsorship to hide money about how targeted allocation money can work with their salary caps, because they do have a weird salary cap in the French league. And so I'm not exactly sure how it goes, but basically it was internal money laundering is what Der Spiegel was reporting on, about overcharging advertisers money so that way they could funnel in more money to spend on their payroll. And that until that gets resolved, I think it's not something that I can really root for PSG on. I like that. That ultimately to me is why I'm just kind of staying away from that one. I do think Roma versus Porto, where anything can go, is going to be an interesting one. I do like the Dortmund Hotspur one. I think when you pair those two teams up against each other right now, those two teams have clout, they have momentum, they have good pieces all over the field. I think that's going to be probably your better matchup. Even better than Atletico versus Juventus. I mean, even though that Juventus has the players. I think the systems are working right now a little bit more for Tottenham and Dortmund. And so when you have that conceptual matchup between those two teams, I'm really excited about it. So that's the thing, though, is like that's why the Champions League is so great. You get to actually see which leagues are better. It's not the consistent arguing in American sports about whether, could the University of Alabama beat the worst team in the NFL? Or could Villanova beat the Philadelphia 76ers or something like that? So I think it is compelling when it gets to this level, especially because you could theoretically see just four leagues represented at this point from this point further. And the only reason why it's 4 is because either an Italian or a Portuguese team is going to move on. But in every one of the other matchups, there's at least one English, one German, or one Spanish team in those matchups. So you could very easily see the English, Spanish, and German kind of rolling over the rest of the groups here.
Yeah, I mean, 4 English teams, 3 German teams, 3 Spanish teams. Spain's kind of dominated the Europa League and Champions League last couple of years. So it'll be interesting to see if they can keep that going. But yeah, you're like you said, this brings up really interesting matchups and really, especially this specific knockout stage compared to years past at this stage. So, I mean, February is a long ways away. We'll see how the teams are trending before that. But right now, I mean, yeah, like you said, it makes for some really unique and fun matchups that I think we're looking forward to.
All right, I think that's going to wrap it up for the show this week. Again, no show next week for the Christmas holiday break. We will return, it'll be pretty close to New Year's at that point. So, and I'm not sure if we'll have a New Year's episode. Maybe we'll have a year in review episode. A lot of conceptual stuff that we will discuss in this upcoming off week for us. Yvonne, what is your shout out?
Donovan Mitchell, guard of the Utah Jazz in the NBA. They played a game in Mexico City, and he was rocking a Mexico jersey. So shout out to Donovan Mitchell, rep in Mexico.
All right, sounds good. Until next time, Merry Christmas if you celebrate it. Happy holidays for whatever you celebrate. And I hope you enjoy it from all of us here at Public House Media and your Soccer Passport. I'm Brice Birch.
I'm Ivan Sanchez Carrasco. Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.